Elsie Holloway was halfway up the ladder when she saw the rider coming through the dust, and her hand froze on the orchard fence post she'd been trying to wire into place. The silhouette cut sharp against the late afternoon sun, familiar in a way that made her chest tighten before her mind could catch up. She knew that posture. She knew the tilt of those shoulders. And she knew, with a certainty that felt like falling, that Gideon Crawford had finally come back to Black Basin. The hammer slipped from her other hand and hit the dirt below with a dull thud. 6 years. He'd been gone 6 years, vanished 2 weeks before their wedding without so much as a letter. And now, he was riding toward her ranch as if no time had passed at all. Elsie climbed down fast, her boots hitting the ground harder than necessary, and stripped off her work gloves, one finger at a time. Her hands were shaking. She hated that they were shaking. Gideon reined in 10 feet from the fence line. He didn't dismount. For a long moment they just looked at each other, and Elsie felt the full weight of every angry speech she'd rehearsed in the first year dissolve into something colder and more dangerous. He looked older, harder. The boy who'd promised her everything had been replaced by a man whose eyes carried ghosts she couldn't name. "I didn't think you'd come back," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she'd expected. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought he might hear it across the distance. "I didn't plan to," Gideon said. His voice was rougher than she remembered, scarred by years she hadn't been part of. "But I got a claim. Water rights upstream. Filed legal in Cheyenne 3 months back." The words hit like a fist to the stomach. Elsie took one step forward, then another, until she was close enough to see the fine lines around his eyes and the scar that traced his left temple. Water rights. Upstream from Willow Ranch. Upstream from the orchard that was the only thing standing between her and losing everything. "You can't," she said. Her voice was shaking now. "This is my land, my water. I've been working this claim for 4 years. It's legal," Gideon said quietly. He shifted in the saddle, and for just a second his expression flickered into something that might have been regret. "I filed proper. Surveyor confirmed the boundary runs through the creek bed north of your fence line." Elsie's mind raced through the implications. The creek was everything. Without steady water, the apple trees would wither before next summer. The vegetables she sold in town would die. The debt she'd been clawing her way out from under since her father's death would swallow her whole. And Gideon, the man who'd left her standing in a borrowed wedding dress with 200 people waiting and no explanation, was the one holding the knife. "Why?" she said. The single word came out raw. "Why now? Why here?" Gideon finally swung down from the saddle. He moved carefully, like a man who'd learned not to make sudden moves, and when he looked at her his eyes were shadowed. "I came back to stop running," he said. "I came back because Black Basin is the only place I ever had anything worth staying for. And I came back because the railroad's trying to buy up every water claim in the basin, and I couldn't let them take this one." The railroad. Elsie's stomach dropped further. She'd heard the rumors. Big, money men from the east, buying up claims and squeezing out anyone who wouldn't sell. But if Gideon held the upstream rights, and the railroad already owned parcels east of town, then Willow Ranch was about to be caught in the middle of a vise. "So you came back to save me," she said bitterly. "How noble. Did it occur to you that I might not want saving from the man who destroyed me the first time?" Gideon flinched. It was a small movement, barely there. But Elsie saw it and felt a savage satisfaction twist in her chest. Good. Let him hurt. Let him feel a fraction of what she'd carried for 6 years. I know what I did, Gideon said quietly. I know I got no right to ask you for anything. But the claim's filed, and it's legal, and the railroad men are in town right now offering triple value for any water rights they can get their hands on. If you want to keep this orchard, you're going to need me, whether you like it or not. Elsie wanted to scream. She wanted to throw something. Instead, she turned on her heel and walked toward the small ranch house that sat at the edge of the orchard, its paint peeling and its roof patched with mismatched shingles. She could feel Gideon watching her. She could feel the weight of his presence, like a storm building on the horizon. Then you'd better come inside, she said without turning around. Because if we're going to fight the railroad, I need to know exactly what kind of leverage you're bringing and what it's going to cost me. Inside the house, the air was cooler, but no less tense. Elsie moved through the small front room with practiced efficiency, pouring water from a clay pitcher into 2 tin cups. Her hands were steady now. Anger was easier to manage than shock. Gideon stood just inside the door, hat in his hands, looking around the sparse interior with an expression she couldn't read. You can sit, she said curtly, nodding toward the rough-hewn table that took up most of the kitchen space. Or you can keep standing like a stranger. Either way, start talking. Gideon sat. He set his hat on the table and folded his hands in front of him. And for a moment, he looked so much like the young man who used to sit in her father's kitchen planning their future that Elsie had to look away. The war changed things, he said. His voice was low and careful. I came back different. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't settle. Kept seeing things that weren't there. I thought if I married you like that, I'd drag you down with me. Elsie slammed her cup down hard enough to slosh water onto the table. You thought, she said, her voice rising. You decided. You made that choice for both of us, and then you vanished without giving me a single word. Do you have any idea what that did to me? What people said? Gideon's jaw tightened. I know it was wrong. I know I hurt you. But I couldn't be what you needed then. I was barely holding myself together. And now, Elsie said coldly, are you holding yourself together now? Or are you still running? The question hung in the air between them. Gideon met her eyes, and she saw something raw and unguarded there that made her chest ache despite herself. I'm trying not to be, he said. That's the best I can give you. It's not enough, Elsie said. But she sat down across from him anyway, because the truth was, she didn't have a choice. If the railroad wanted her land, and Gideon held the upstream claim, then she needed him. She hated it. But she needed him. Tell me about the railroad, she said. What do they want, and how bad is it? Gideon pulled a folded paper from inside his coat and spread it on the table. It was a surveyor's map, marked with lines and notations in a hand Elsie didn't recognize. The railroad's planning a new line through the basin, he said. Needs water for the steam engines and the work camps. They've been buying up claims quiet-like for 6 months. Anyone who won't sell gets squeezed out. Harassment. Threats. Sometimes worse. Elsie traced the lines with one finger. Her land sat right in the middle of the proposed route. If she didn't sell, they'd either reroute or find a way to force her out. And if Gideon controlled the water, they'd come after him too. So we're both targets, she said. Gideon nodded. But if we pool our claims, File a joint water usage agreement? We might have enough legal weight to negotiate better terms. Or at least make them pay fair value instead of stealing it. A joint agreement, Elsie said slowly. That means we'd have to trust each other. Work together. Share the risk. Gideon looked at her steadily. I know that's asking a lot, but it's the best chance either of us has. Elsie sat back in her chair and studied him. His face was weathered and scarred, his hands calloused and strong. He looked like a man who'd survived things she couldn't imagine, and he'd come back. Despite everything, he'd come back to the one place that should have been closed to him forever. I have conditions, she said. Her voice was hard. If we do this, you work. You don't just hold a piece of paper and collect a share. You help me save this orchard. You fix what needs fixing. You prove you can stay. Gideon's expression shifted into something that might have been relief. I can do that, he said. And you tell me the truth, Elsie continued. No more secrets. No more running. If you're going to be here, you're all the way here. Gideon hesitated, and Elsie saw the shadow pass across his face. There's something else you need to know, he said quietly. The reason I was able to file the upstream claim. I had money. Not much, but enough. Money I saved from the war and after. Money I got by doing things I'm not proud of. Elsie's stomach tightened. What kind of things? Hired gun work, Gideon said. Not outlawing, not murder, but close enough. Men paid me to solve problems they couldn't solve legal. I took the jobs because I didn't care whether I lived or died, and dangerous work pays better. The confession settled between them like a stone. Elsie wanted to be shocked, wanted to be horrified. But mostly, she just felt tired. Tired of being angry. Tired of carrying the weight of betrayal. Tired of fighting alone. Do you care now? She asked. Whether you live or die. Gideon looked at her, and his eyes were steady. I'm starting to, he said. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a promise. But it was honest, and honesty was something Elsie could work with. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the orchard that represented everything she'd built from nothing. The trees were young and struggling, but they were hers. She'd planted every one of them with her own hands after her father died, and the debt collectors came calling. She'd fought for this land when everyone in town said a woman couldn't hold a ranch alone. She wasn't going to lose it now. All right, she said without turning around. We'll file the joint agreement. We'll fight the railroad. But if you run again, Gideon Crawford, I swear I will hunt you down myself. She heard the chair scrape as he stood. Heard his boots cross the floor. When he spoke, his voice was close enough that she could feel the warmth of it. I won't run, he said. Not from this. Not from you. Elsie turned to face him. The space between them felt charged and dangerous. She could see the pulse beating in his throat. Could see the way his hands tightened on his hat brim. Whatever this was, it wasn't simple. It wasn't easy. But it was real. There's a town meeting tomorrow night, she said. Railroad representatives are coming to make their pitch. We should be there. Together. Show them we're united. Gideon nodded. I'll be there. And the roof, Elsie added, glancing up at the ceiling where a faint water stain marked the last storm's damage. It needs patching before the next freeze. If you're staying, That's your first job." Gideon followed her gaze, and a ghost of a smile crossed his face. "I've patched worse." "Then get started at first light," Elsie said. "You can sleep in the barn tonight. There's a cot in the back room, and blankets in the chest." She moved past him toward the door, needing air, needing space to think. But as she passed, Gideon caught her wrist gently, not restraining, just enough to make her pause. "Elsie," he said. Her name in his voice sent a shiver down her spine. "I know I don't deserve another chance, but I'm grateful you're giving me one anyway." Elsie looked down at his hand on her wrist, then up at his face. "Don't make me regret it," she said softly. Then she pulled free and walked out into the gathering dusk, leaving him standing in the house that might become theirs, or might become nothing at all. That night, Elsie lay awake in her narrow bed and listened to the wind test the corners of the house. She could see the barn from her window, could see the faint glow of lamplight through the cracks in the wood. Gideon was out there. After 6 years of absence, after 6 years of building a life without him, he was 100 feet away, and the proximity felt impossible. She thought about the girl she'd been, the one who'd believed in love and promises and futures that stretched out bright and unbroken. That girl had died the day Gideon disappeared. The woman who'd taken her place was harder, sharper, less willing to bend. But lying there in the dark, feeling the ache of old wounds reopening, Elsie wondered if maybe she'd been wrong to lock her heart away so completely. The debt was the worst of it. The thing she hadn't told anyone, not even her closest friend in town. When her father died, he'd left behind more than just the ranch. He'd left behind a note he'd signed with a man named Thorne, a gambler who'd come through Black Basin the winter before the war. $3,000 at 20% interest, compounded yearly. Elsie had been paying it down bit by bit, but the interest kept growing faster than she could chip away at the principal. If she lost the orchard, Thorne would take everything. The land, the house, even the clothes on her back if he wanted them. She couldn't tell Gideon about the debt. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because if he knew how desperate she really was, he might decide the fight wasn't worth it. Or worse, he might try to save her again, and she couldn't survive another rescue that turned into abandonment. Morning came cold and bright. Elsie woke to the sound of hammering on the roof and stumbled to the window to see Gideon already up there, working in the sharp autumn light. He'd stripped down to his shirt and vest despite the chill, and she could see the lean strength in his shoulders as he pried up damaged shingles and fitted new ones into place. She dressed quickly and went outside. The air smelled like frost and dry grass. Gideon looked down when he heard her boots on the porch and lifted a hand in greeting. "Found a weak spot over the kitchen," he called down. "Whole section's going to need replacing before snow comes. I can get it done today if the weather holds." Elsie shaded her eyes against the sun. "There's lumber in the shed," she called back. "Help yourself. I'm going into town for supplies. I'll be back by noon." Gideon nodded and went back to work. Elsie watched him for a moment longer than necessary, then made herself turn away and head for the small stable where she kept her mare. She needed to talk to the land office clerk, a man named Peters who'd always been kind to her. If Gideon's claim was as solid as he said, Peters would know. And if there were any loopholes, any way to challenge it, she needed to find them before the railroad made their move. Town was a 30-minute ride, and Elsie used the time to sort through her options. She could fight Gideon's claim in court, but that would take months and money she didn't have. She could try to buy him out, but she was already drowning in debt. Or she could do what he suggested, pool their resources, file the joint agreement, and present a united front. It was the smartest choice. It was also the most dangerous, because working that close to Gideon meant opening herself up to all the feelings she'd spent 6 years trying to bury. Black Basin sat in a shallow valley, surrounded by scrub hills and distant mountains. The main street was wide and dusty, lined with false front buildings that had seen better days. Elsie tied her mare outside the land office and went inside, grateful for the dim coolness after the bright morning. Peters looked up from his desk and smiled. "Miss Holloway," he said. "Wasn't expecting to see you today. What brings you in?" "I need to check a claim," Elsie said, keeping her voice level. "Filed out of Cheyenne about 3 months back. Water rights on the creek north of my property line." Peter's smile faded. He pulled a leather-bound ledger from the shelf behind him and flipped through pages. "You talking about the Crawford claim," he said. "That's the one," Elsie said. "Is it legitimate?" Peters ran his finger down a column of entries and nodded slowly. "Surveyed and registered proper. Fees paid in full. It's solid, Miss Holloway. Can't be challenged on technical grounds." Elsie's heart sank. She'd known it was likely, but hearing it confirmed made it real in a way that hurt. "What about a joint usage agreement?" she asked. "If 2 claim holders wanted to pool their water rights and file together, how would that work?" Peters looked at her with sharp interest. "That'd be complicated. You'd need a lawyer to draw up the terms. But it's been done before. Gives both parties more leverage if someone comes trying to buy them out." He paused. "The railroad been sniffing around your land." "They're sniffing around everyone's land," Elsie said. "I'm just trying to stay ahead of them." Peters leaned back in his chair. "You're smart to be cautious. I've seen 3 families sell out in the last month, and none of them got fair value. Railroads playing hardball. They want what they want, and they don't care who gets hurt." Elsie thanked him and left, her mind racing. She stopped at the general store for flour and salt, then at the feedlot for a sack of oats. By the time she headed back toward the ranch, the sun was high, and the day had warmed enough to make her loosen her shawl. She was halfway home when she saw the riders. 3 men on horseback, moving at a steady pace toward Willow Ranch from the east. Even at a distance, she could tell they weren't local. Their clothes were too clean, their horses too well groomed. Railroad men, and they were heading straight for her land. Elsie kicked her mare into a gallop. The distance closed fast, dust rising in a cloud behind her. By the time she reached the ranch, the 3 men were already there, sitting their horses just outside the fence line. Gideon was standing in the yard, hand resting casually on his gun belt, watching them with the stillness of a man who'd learned to read danger from a long way off. Elsie reined in hard and swung down before her mare had fully stopped. She crossed the yard in long strides and took her place next to Gideon, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" she said, her voice carrying clear and cold. The man in the middle was older, gray-haired and well-fed, with the look of someone who was used to getting his way. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Holloway," he said. "My name is Warner. I represent the Union Central Railroad. I believe you know why I'm here." "I can guess," Elsie said. "But I'm not interested in selling." Warner's smile widened. "Everyone's interested in selling, Miss Holloway, It's just a matter of finding the right price. We're prepared to offer you $2,000 for your land and water rights. That's more than fair for a struggling orchard. It's a fraction of what it's worth, Elsie shot back. And my land's not for sale at any price. Warner's gaze slid to Gideon. And you are Gideon Crawford, Gideon said. I hold the upstream water claim. Also not for sale. Warner's expression hardened. You two think you're clever, pooling your claims. But let me be clear. The railroad's coming through this basin whether you cooperate or not. You can take our generous offer now, or you can wait until we make it less generous. Your choice. Elsie felt Gideon shift beside her, felt the coiled tension in him. She spoke before he could. We'll see you at the town meeting tonight, she said. If you've got a real offer, you can make it in front of the whole community. Until then, you're trespassing. Warner studied them for a long moment, then nodded to his companions. They turned their horses and rode off at an unhurried pace, leaving a message that was clear as daylight. They weren't worried, and they weren't going away. Elsie waited until they were out of sight before she let herself breathe. $2,000, she said bitterly. That wouldn't even cover my father's debt. Gideon turned to look at her sharply. What debt? The words were out before Elsie could stop them, and she cursed herself for the slip. It was the adrenaline, the fear, the way Gideon's presence made her walls crack when she needed them most. She looked away. It's nothing. Old business. Elsie, Gideon said quietly. If you're in trouble, I need to know. We're in this together now. Elsie wanted to laugh, wanted to scream. Instead, she just shook her head. You gave up the right to know my troubles when you left, she said. Some things don't get fixed just because you came back. She walked past him toward the house, her hands shaking again. Behind her, she heard Gideon let out a long breath, but he didn't follow. Good. She needed space, needed time to shore up the defenses that had just crumbled so easily. The rest of the day passed in tense silence. Gideon worked on the roof. Elsie worked in the orchard, pruning branches and checking the irrigation channels that carried water from the creek. Every time she looked up, she could see him moving against the sky, steady and methodical. It should have been comforting. Instead, it made her chest ache with something she couldn't name. By evening, the temperature had dropped, and the sky was streaked with red and gold. Elsie changed into her best dress, a deep blue wool with black trim that she saved for town occasions. She pinned her hair up carefully and looked at herself in the small mirror over her wash basin. The woman looking back was older than the girl Gideon had left behind. Harder. But maybe that was what survival looked like. She turned to find Gideon standing in the doorway. He'd cleaned up too, changed into a dark shirt, and brushed the dust from his coat. For a moment, they just looked at each other, and Elsie felt the weight of everything unsaid pressing down like a storm about to break. You ready? He asked. As I'll ever be, Elsie said. They rode into town together as the last light faded from the sky. The meeting was being held in the church, the only building large enough to hold the whole community. By the time they arrived, the benches were already filling up. Elsie felt the eyes on them as they walked in together, felt the whispers start. She lifted her chin and kept walking, Gideon a solid presence at her side. Warner was already there, standing at the front with two other railroad men and a man Elsie didn't recognize. She found a seat near the middle, and Gideon sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him through the layers of fabric. The meeting started with the preacher offering a prayer. Then, Warner took over. He laid out the railroad's plans with smooth efficiency. Jobs, progress, connection to the wider world. He made it sound like salvation. He made it sound like anyone who refused was standing in the way of the future. Then he started talking numbers. Fair market value, he called it. But the amounts he quoted made several people in the audience shift uncomfortably. Elsie did the math in her head and realized he was offering roughly half what the land was actually worth. When Warner finished, the preacher opened the floor for questions. An older rancher named McCready stood up first. "What happens to those of us who don't want to sell?" he asked. Warner's smile was patient. "The railroad has the legal authority to claim right-of-way for essential infrastructure," he said. "We prefer to negotiate. But if negotiation fails, we have other options." "That's a threat," someone called from the back. "That's reality," Warner said. "The railroad's coming. You can profit from it, or you can be left behind. Your choice." Elsie felt Gideon tense beside her. She put a hand on his arm. A silent message. Wait. Not yet. But she could feel the anger radiating off him like heat from a stove. Then the stranger stepped forward, and Elsie's blood ran cold. She knew that face, knew those cold eyes, and that thin smile. Thorne. The man who held her father's debt. The man who owned her future. "I think it's worth mentioning," Thorne said, his voice smooth as oil, "that several properties in this basin are already encumbered by debt. Properties that could be called in at any time if the holders can't meet their obligations. The railroad's offers might be the only chance some folks have to settle their accounts and walk away clean." His eyes found Elsie in the crowd. The message was clear. Sell, or I'll take everything. Elsie felt the room tilt, felt Gideon's hand cover hers where it gripped the bench, felt the trap closing around her from all sides. "Stand up," Gideon said quietly. His voice was steady, urgent. "Stand up and tell them the truth." "I can't," Elsie whispered. "If I admit the debt, I lose everything." "You're going to lose everything anyway if you stay silent," Gideon said. "Trust me. Please." It was the please that broke through. Elsie stood on shaking legs. Every eye in the room turned to her. She could feel her heart hammering against her ribs. "I have a question," she said, and her voice came out stronger than she felt. "What happens to debt holders who sell their land for less than the debt amount? Does the railroad cover the shortfall? Or are people expected to remain in debt even after losing their homes?" Thorne's smile widened. "That would be a matter for private negotiation," he said, "between debtor and creditor. So you profit either way," Elsie said. "If we don't sell, you call in the debt. If we do sell, you take our land and leave us owing you money we can never repay. That's not business. That's extortion." A murmur ran through the crowd. Warner's expression darkened. "Miss Holloway, I don't think you understand the complexity of these arrangements." "I understand perfectly," Elsie said. Her fear was transforming into fury now, hot and clean. "I understand that you're trying to steal land from people who've worked their whole lives to build something. I understand that you're using debt as a weapon. And I understand that if we let you divide us, we all lose." Gideon stood beside her. "She's right," he said, His voice carried through the church like a blade. I've seen this before. Railroad comes through, buys up the land cheap, and 6 months later the people who sold are living in tent cities, or worse. You want to buy our land? You pay what it's worth. You want right of way? You negotiate fair terms. But you don't get to threaten us and expect us to smile and thank you for it. Warner stood. This meeting is over, he said. We'll be back with revised offers. Those who are smart will accept them. He walked out, his men following. Thorne lingered, his eyes on Elsie. $3,000, he said quietly, plus interest. I'll expect payment in full by the end of the month, Miss Holloway. Unless you'd like to discuss alternative arrangements. Elsie met his gaze without flinching. I'll have your money, she said. Every penny. Thorne smiled. I look forward to it. Then, he was gone, leaving Elsie standing in a church full of neighbors who now knew exactly how desperate she was. The ride back to the ranch was silent. Elsie felt numb. She'd burned her last bridge tonight. Everyone in town knew about the debt. Knew she was one bad harvest away from losing everything. The shame of it sat like lead in her stomach. They were almost home when Gideon finally spoke. $3,000, he said. That's what you owe. Plus interest, Elsie said bitterly. It grows faster than I can pay it down. I've been trying for 4 years. How much do you have saved? About 800, Elsie said. Not enough. Not close to enough. Gideon was quiet for a long moment. Then, I have 1,200 in a bank in Cheyenne. Money from the hired gun work. I can wire for it. Elsie pulled her horse to a stop. No, she said. Absolutely not. Elsie, listen to me. Gideon turned his horse to face her. If Thorne calls in that debt, you lose the ranch. If you lose the ranch, my upstream claim is worthless. We're tied together whether we like it or not. Let me help. This isn't your problem, Elsie said. You don't owe me anything. You certainly don't owe me blood money from work that almost destroyed you. I owe you everything, Gideon said, and his voice cracked. I owe you 6 years. I owe you the life we should have had. I can't give that back. But I can give you this. Please, let me give you this. Elsie stared at him in the darkness. She could barely see his face, but she could hear the desperate honesty in his voice, could feel the weight of his guilt and his need to make something right. Why, she said. Why does this matter so much to you? Because I love you, Gideon said. The words came out rough and raw. I never stopped. I left because I thought I was too broken to be what you needed. But all I did was break us both. If I can fix even one piece of that, I will. Elsie's breath caught. She'd imagined hearing those words 1,000 times in the years after he left. She'd imagined throwing them back in his face. But now, sitting on her horse in the cold dark, with disaster closing in from all sides, all she felt was tired. Love isn't enough, she said quietly. It wasn't enough then. It won't be enough now. Maybe not, Gideon said. But it's a start, and we need every advantage we can get. They rode the rest of the way in silence. When they reached the ranch, Elsie dismounted and stood in the yard looking up at the house that might not be hers much longer. Gideon came to stand beside her. I'll wire the bank in the morning, he said. Should have the money by end of week. Elsie nodded. She couldn't speak. If she spoke, she'd cry. And she'd be damned if she'd cry in front of him. Gideon reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he touched her cheek with the backs of his fingers, gentle as a whisper. "We're going to save this," he said. "I promise you." "Don't make promises you can't keep," Elsie said. But she didn't pull away from his touch. "Then I'll keep it," Gideon said. "Whatever it takes." The next few days were a blur of hard work and harder decisions. Gideon rode to town and wired for his money. Elsie spent every daylight hour in the orchard, working until her hands blistered and her back ached. They moved around each other carefully, like two people relearning a dance they'd once known by heart. On the third day, Gideon climbed onto the roof at dawn to finish the patching. Elsie was in the kitchen making coffee when she heard the crack of splintering wood and the shout of surprise. She ran outside in time to see Gideon grab for the roof edge as a section of rotten timber gave way beneath him. He caught himself, boots scrabbling for purchase on the steep pitch. Elsie's heart stopped. For a frozen second, she saw him falling, saw him hitting the ground, saw herself alone again. "Hold on," she shouted, already running for the ladder. "Just hold on." She climbed faster than was safe, her breath coming in gasps. When she reached the roof edge, she grabbed his wrist with both hands and pulled. Gideon found his footing and hauled himself back up, and they collapsed together on the section of roof that was still solid. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, Elsie started laughing. It came out shaky and half hysterical, but it was real. Gideon looked at her like she'd lost her mind, and that made her laugh harder. "What's funny?" he asked. "You almost died fixing my roof," Elsie said. "What a stupid way for this to end." Gideon started laughing too, and suddenly they were both sitting on the roof in the early morning light, laughing until tears ran down their faces, the terror bleeding out into something lighter. When the laughter faded, they were sitting close enough that Elsie could count the flecks of gold in Gideon's eyes. Close enough that when he leaned in, she didn't pull away. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, like a question. Then Gideon's hand came up to cup her face, and Elsie leaned into him, and the kiss deepened into something fierce and desperate, and 6 years overdue. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Gideon rested his forehead against hers. "I never forgot," he said. "Not for a single day." "Neither did I," Elsie whispered. "And I hated you for it." "I know," Gideon said. "I hated myself too. They might have stayed there longer, might have said more, but a voice called up from below. "Hate to interrupt," the voice said. And it was cold and amused, "but you might want to come down. We've got business to discuss." Elsie's stomach dropped. She looked down to see Thorn standing in her yard, flanked by 2 men with guns on their hips. Behind them were Warner and 3 railroad men on horseback. Elsie and Gideon climbed down fast. Gideon moved to stand in front of her, but Elsie pushed past him. This was her fight too. "You're trespassing," she said. "Get off my land." "Your land," Thorn said with a smile. "Funny. According to my records, you've missed your last payment. That means this land reverts to me as collateral. Effective immediately." "I have until the end of the month," Elsie said. "You had until the end of the month," Thorn corrected. "But I've decided to call the note early. It's within my legal right when a debtor is clearly unable to pay." He gestured to the struggling orchard, the patched roof, the worn fence line. You're in default, Miss Holloway. Time to settle up or move out. Gideon's hand moved toward his gun. Thorne's men reacted instantly, hands dropping to their own weapons. Warner held up a hand. Let's all stay calm, he said. Mr. Thorne and I have been discussing a solution that benefits everyone. The railroad will purchase Miss Holloway's debt from Mr. Thorne for the full amount, plus a premium for his trouble. In exchange, Miss Holloway signs over her land to us. Clean. Simple. No one gets hurt. And if I refuse, Elsie said. Then Mr. Thorne takes possession through the courts, Warner said. Which will take time and cost you more in legal fees. Either way, you lose the land. This way, at least you walk away clear of debt. No, Elsie said. Her voice was shaking but firm. I'm not selling. And you can't force me. Thorne's smile widened. Actually, we can. He pulled a folded document from his coat. Signed by a judge in Cheyenne. Writ of possession. I can have the sheriff here by tomorrow to remove you physically if necessary. Gideon moved then, smooth and fast. His gun cleared leather before anyone else could react, barrel leveled at Thorne's chest. Everyone froze. You're not taking this land, Gideon said. His voice was flat and cold. Not today. Not tomorrow. You want to push this? We can push it. But understand that if you try to remove her by force, people will die. Starting with you. Warner's face went pale. This is madness. You're one man against 6. I'm a man with nothing to lose, Gideon said. And I'm a very good shot. Are you willing to bet your life that your men are faster? The silence stretched. Thorne's smile had finally faded. He looked at Gideon, and Elsie saw the calculation in his eyes. Saw him weighing profit against risk. We'll be back with the sheriff, Thorne said finally. You're just delaying the inevitable. Maybe, Gideon said. But a delay's all we need. Thorne and his men backed toward their horses. Warner followed, shooting dark looks over his shoulder. They rode off, leaving Elsie and Gideon standing in the yard with the morning sun climbing higher and the weight of what they'd just done settling over them like a shroud. Elsie turned to Gideon. Her legs felt weak. You just threatened to kill a man in front of witnesses, she said. I meant it, Gideon said. He was sliding his gun back into its holster, hands steady. They're not taking this from you. From us. They'll come back with the law, Elsie said. We can't win this. Then we change the game, Gideon said. He looked at her with fierce intensity. We file the joint water claim today. Right now. We ride to town. Get it registered. And then we go over Thorne's head. Find a judge who isn't in the railroad's pocket. Fight the debt claim on technical grounds. Anything to buy time. Time for what? Elsie said. We still can't pay. Time for me to cash out my claim, Gideon said. Sell my rights to you for $1. Make it part of the joint agreement so the railroad can't touch it without your consent. Then we negotiate from strength instead of desperation. You'd give up your claim, Elsie said slowly. After everything. I came back for you, Gideon said. Not for land, not for water. For you. The claim was just an excuse to stay. I don't need it. I just need you to let me fight for you. With you. Elsie stared at him, saw the truth in his face, Saw the man he'd become through all the years and battles and regrets. Saw that he meant every word. "All right," she said. "We fight together. But if we're doing this, we do it all the way. No more secrets. No more running. We face whatever comes side by side." Gideon's expression softened. He reached for her hand and she let him take it. Side by side, he agreed. They rode to town at a gallop and burst into the land office with dust still clinging to their clothes. Peters looked up in alarm. But when Elsie explained what they needed, he moved fast. By noon, the joint water agreement was filed and registered. By mid-afternoon, they had a lawyer named Brennan, an older man with a reputation for being honest even when it cost him, looking over the debt documents. "This is weak," Brennan said, tapping the contract Thorne had produced. "The acceleration clause is vague. I can challenge it. But it'll take time, and it'll cost money." "How much time?" Elsie asked. "A month. Maybe 2 if we get lucky with the judge's calendar. And money. $500, Brennan said. Half up front. Gideon pulled a leather pouch from his coat. "There's 300 here," he said. "We'll have the rest within the week." Brennan nodded. "I'll file the challenge papers today. That'll freeze any action on the writ until we get a hearing. But understand, this just buys you time. If the judge rules against you, you'll still owe the full debt. Then we'll deal with that when it comes," Elsie said. "Right now, time is enough." They left the lawyer's office as the sun was setting. Elsie felt lighter than she had in days. They hadn't won. But they hadn't lost either. And for the first time since Gideon rode back into her life, she felt like maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. That night, they sat on the porch of the ranch house and watched the stars come out. Elsie leaned against Gideon's shoulder and felt his arm come around her, solid and warm. "Tell me about the war," she said quietly. "Tell me what happened to you." Gideon was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and careful. "I saw men die," he said. "Friends. Brothers. Boys who shouldn't have been there at all. I saw things I can't unsee. Did things I can't undo. And when it was over, I didn't know how to be the man you'd fallen in love with anymore. So you ran," Elsie said. "So I ran." Gideon agreed. "I convinced myself I was protecting you. But really I was just protecting myself from having to see disappointment in your eyes." "I wouldn't have been disappointed," Elsie said. "I would have helped you." "I know that now," Gideon said. "But I didn't know it then. I was too broken to see it." Elsie turned to look at him. "And now? Are you still broken?" Gideon met her eyes. "I think we're all broken in some way," he said. "But I'm learning that maybe being broken doesn't mean being worthless. Maybe it just means we fit together different than we planned." Elsie reached up and touched his face. "I'm not the girl you left behind," she said. "I'm harder. Angrier. More scared than I let on." "I'm not the boy who left," Gideon said. "I'm darker. More damaged. Less sure of everything except one thing." "What's that?" Elsie whispered. "That I love you," Gideon said. "That I never stopped. That if you'll let me spend the rest of my life proving it, I will." Elsie kissed him then, slow and deep, and full of 6 years of grief and anger and desperate hope. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. "Don't make me regret this," she said. "I won't," Gideon promised. "Not this time." The hearing came 6 weeks later, on a cold November morning when frost painted the orchard silver. Elsie wore her blue dress and pinned her hair up with trembling hands. Gideon stood behind her in the small mirror, meeting her eyes in the reflection. "Whatever happens today," he said, "we face it together." "Together," Elsie agreed. The courtroom was packed. Half of Black Basin had turned out to watch. Thorne sat on one side with his lawyers and Warner beside him. Elsie and Gideon sat with Brennan on the other. The judge, a stern woman named Hayes, called the court to order. Brennan made his argument. The acceleration clause was improperly applied. The debt amount included excessive and possibly illegal interest. And Thorne's involvement with the railroad constituted a conflict of interest. Thorne's lawyer countered. The debt was legal, properly documented, and in default. Miss Holloway had failed to make payments. The law was clear. Judge Hayes listened to both sides, reviewed the documents, and asked pointed questions that made both lawyers sweat. When she finally sat back, the courtroom went silent. "I'm ruling in favor of the defendant," she said. "The acceleration clause is vague and was applied arbitrarily. Mr. Thorne, you will reinstate the original payment schedule. Miss Holloway, you will make your payments on time or face immediate foreclosure. The writ of possession is dissolved." Court dismissed. Elsie sagged in her chair. Gideon's hand found hers under the table and squeezed. They'd won. Not completely, not permanently, but enough. Outside the courthouse, townspeople stopped them to offer congratulations and support. McCready shook Gideon's hand. "You did good," he said. "Both of you. Stood up to those railroad vultures." Warner appeared as they were heading toward their horses. He looked furious. "This isn't over," he said. "We'll find another way." "Maybe," Gideon said. "But it won't be easy, and it won't be cheap. You want this land, you're going to have to earn it." Warner stalked away. Thorne was nowhere to be seen. Elsie allowed herself a moment of savage satisfaction. The ride back to the ranch felt different. Lighter. The sun was breaking through the clouds, and the land stretched out around them full of possibility instead of threat. That night, Elsie made dinner while Gideon split wood for the stove. They moved around each other in the small kitchen with an ease that felt new and old at the same time. When they sat down to eat, Elsie raised her tin cup. "To time bought," she said. Gideon touched his cup to hers. "To fights won together." They were washing dishes when someone knocked on the door. Elsie and Gideon exchanged glances. It was late. Visitors at this hour usually meant trouble. Gideon opened the door with his hand on his gun. But the man standing on the porch wasn't a threat. It was Peters, from the land office, holding a lantern and looking apologetic. "Sorry to bother you so late," he said. "But I thought you'd want to know. Warner and his men left town this afternoon, packed up and rode out. Word is the railroad's pulling back from Black Basin. Too much resistance, not enough profit." Elsie came to stand beside Gideon. "They're gone. For now," Peters said. "Might come back someday. But for now, you're clear." When Peters left, Elsie turned to Gideon. She felt tears prickling her eyes and didn't bother to hide them. "We did it," she said. "We actually did it." Gideon pulled her into his arms. "You did it," he said. "You stood up and fought when anyone else would have given in. I'm so damn proud of you." "We did it," Elsie corrected. Together. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the lamplight. When Elsie finally pulled back, she looked up at Gideon with clear eyes. "Ask me," she said. Gideon's expression shifted. "Are you sure?" "Ask me," Elsie repeated. Gideon took her hands in his. "Elsie Holloway," he said, and his voice was steady and sure. "I left you once and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But if you'll give me another chance, if you'll let me stay and work beside you and love you the way you deserve, I swear I'll never leave again. Marry me, not because it's expected or convenient. Marry me because I love you, and I want to spend every day proving it." Elsie felt the tears spill over. "Yes," she said. "Yes. But if you ever run again, Gideon Crawford, I'm coming after you." "I won't run," Gideon said. He was smiling through his own tears. "I promise you. I'm done running." They were married 3 weeks later in the same church where they'd faced down the railroad. Half the town turned out, and this time when Elsie walked down the aisle, she knew the man waiting for her would be there at the end. Knew he'd stay. Knew that whatever came next, they'd face it together. The vows were simple, traditional. But when Gideon slid the ring onto her finger and promised to love her in sickness and health, in poverty and wealth, until death parted them, Elsie heard the echo of everything they'd survived. Heard the promise beneath the promise. "I'm here. I'm staying. You're mine. And I'm yours. And nothing will take that away again." When the preacher pronounced them married, Gideon kissed her like a man who'd been given a second chance at salvation. The congregation cheered. And Elsie Holloway, now Elsie Crawford, let herself believe in happy endings after all. They spent their wedding night in the ranch house that was finally, completely, theirs. Gideon carried her over the threshold despite her laughing protests, and they stood together in the front room looking around at the space that had seen so much struggle and was now full of promise. "I have something for you," Gideon said. He pulled an envelope from his coat pocket and handed it to her. Elsie opened it and found a deed. Her deed, with both their names on it now. Joint ownership. Legal and binding. "I don't want there to be any question," Gideon said. "This is ours. Together. Equal partners in everything." Elsie looked up at him with shining eyes. "Equal partners," she agreed. That winter was hard, but they faced it together. The orchard survived. The debt payments were made on time. And when spring came and the apple trees bloomed for the first time in years, Elsie and Gideon stood in the orchard at dawn and watched the sun paint the blossoms gold. "It's going to be a good year," Gideon said. "It already is," Elsie said. She took his hand. "We made it through. Together." Gideon pulled her close. "Together," he agreed. "And that's how it'll always be." In the distance, Black Basin was waking up. Smoke rose from chimneys. The windmill turned in the morning breeze. And on Willow Ranch, 2 people who'd been given a second chance held each other in the blooming orchard and knew, with absolute certainty, that they'd finally come home.